This program is a paid commercial announcement and in no way represents the views of WPHT or its management.
Cheek Media Partners presents The Adam Malamut Show. Real people, real perspectives, real opinion. Presented by the law offices of Adam Malamut and Associates. Powered by InjuredWorkers.com. And driven by Jaguar Land Rover Westchester. Now, live from the Malamut and Associate Law Studios, The Adam Malamut Show. Hosted by Adam Malamut.
And a good Saturday evening, everyone, and welcome in. This is the Adam Malamut Show on Talk Radio 1210 WPHT, and energized, fired up, a very passionate Adam Malamut drops into your radio dial tonight. Adam, and I welcome you in. We're getting very, very close. We're approaching now where Election Day is in range. And with that setup or that tee up, I'll toss it over to you, sir.
Thanks, Krause. Happy Saturday night. We are now 24 days from November 3rd. I like to call that the day the complaint department opens. Pleased to announce today's special guest, Keith Gentes, my partner here at Malamut & Associates. And we're going to talk about something important. We're going to talk about something that the listeners of this station probably rarely get, and that is a different perspective. We're going to talk about Vice President Pence and his debate, which to me, a debate is an exchange of ideas and competing viewpoints. I have a completely different view as to whether we should really even call this a debate. But his debate with Senator Harris. We're going to talk about the debate that President Trump had with Vice President Biden. And that, I can tell you, is not a debate. So for the listeners of this station historically has been a station that caters to a conservative audience. I can tell you from speaking with my conservative friends, they are appalled. They are appalled at the behavior of the President of the United States during what is supposed to be a dignified debate where people talk about candidates, talk about their position as they're running for what I still believe is the greatest office, the greatest position in the entire world. Not in this country, but in the entire world. And as a patriot, as somebody who truly loves this country, if you look in the mirror, you can't tell me that you don't have a problem with the direction that this country is going on. If this country is where you believe it should be, I'm going to tell you now is probably a good time for you to change the station, go do something else. I'm sure that there's some cartoons on TV, but I can tell you that if you're an educated individual and you care about America, America is not where it should be right now. The debate this week centered on the vice presidential candidates. We have an incumbent who is the former governor of Indiana. We have the former senator from California who was the state attorney general, who was the district attorney for San Francisco, who ran, as she so eloquently put it, the second largest Justice Department in the United States, second only to the United States Justice Department. We're going to leave out all of the very important barriers that Senator Harris has broken and I believe will continue to break, because that, to me, is going to take away from the critical point that I'm going to make as to why Senator Harris should be vice president to Vice President Biden as the President of the United States. I will address in a future show, though, and I promise you I will address it, because the barriers that Senator Harris has broken and continues to break serves as an inspiration, and I hope as an encourager for females and people in minority groups all around this country to understand that there is a place for them. There's a place for them in leadership, but that's not today's topic. Today's topic is our misogynistic vice president and the absolute circus that has been perpetuated from the presidential debate to the vice presidential debate. I give Vice President Pence credit for following the instructions of his handlers and congratulating Senator Harris on her accomplishments. Folks, this isn't about accomplishments. This is about how we're going to run our country. This is about foreign affairs. This is about domestic policy. This is about a pandemic that has taken over 200,000 Americans' lives. This is about truth. Truth. If you can look in the mirror and say that our leadership is telling you the truth, you need a new mirror. Look, I like to look in the mirror and think that I'm a lot thinner and a lot taller than I am. But that's not the facts. We're talking facts. And I will tell you that what our president and our vice president deliver are not facts, and that's a problem. Vice President Pence couldn't help himself. He couldn't help himself. He had to continue to interrupt Senator Harris during her 2 minutes of uninterrupted discussion. The moderator asked questions. And as an attorney, we have a term of art that we use, evading the question. All he did was evade questions. He didn't answer the moderator's questions. As a matter of fact, he said, "Thank you for your question, but I'm going to choose to go to whatever topic du jour it was at that moment that he felt that he didn't get his say in." Apples produce apple trees, are produced by apple trees. Apple trees produce apples. President Trump is an apple tree. He is untruthful. He has deceived the American public. Mike Pence is an apple that has fallen from that tree. There's no difference between the two. I mean, look, sure, maybe Vice President Pence is more refined in his delivery. Maybe he is less of a bully in terms of the way he uses his physical height to peer down at his opponent. He's certainly less orange. He probably paid more taxes than the president. I know that every single person listening here today paid more taxes than the president. $750 in taxes, as this man once fought with Forbes magazine because he was not included in the 400 richest people in America. You don't have to throw up a show of hands. I can't see you right now, but I'm guessing there's not a single listener that's included in that 400 richest people in America. These people cannot identify with us. The leadership of our country cannot identify with the average voter. And that, therein, is where the problem begins. It doesn't end there. That's where it begins. We've got an exciting show today. My partner, Keith Gentes, is here. We're going to talk about facts, truth, and we're going to talk about our country's leadership. We're going to talk about the Supreme Court. We're going to talk about a lot of things that you probably don't get to hear a different perspective on, but I'm really hoping that you do stay tuned in, because I'd like to share this perspective. And I'd like to share it with the hope that taking some of the information that I promise you is fact today, you will think about the direction of our country. We're going to go to break. We'll be back in a minute.
The Adam Malamut Show. Real people, real perspectives, real opinion.
Whatever the vice president is claiming the administration has done, clearly it hasn't worked. When you're looking at over 210,000 dead bodies in our country, American lives that have been lost, families that are grieving that loss. And you know, the vice president is the head of the task force and knew on January 28th how serious this was.
And back here on the Adam Malamut Show here on Talk Radio 1210 WPHT. If you're active on social media, you'll find Adam on Twitter at Adam S. Malamut ESQ, or on Instagram at attorney _Adam _Malamut. I imagine the social media will be popping, perhaps, Adam, when this show completes, which is all good, man. Good stuff.
I hope so, Krause. You know, welcome back. Listen, what I said during our first segment, a lot of people may find to be offensive. America is a collection of people that come from different cultures, different backgrounds, and different ideas. And that's what makes this country great. There's no cookie cutter for what an American is. And that's where our country needs to improve. Our country, one of the many areas, but that's where our country needs to improve. We have systemic racism. We have a prejudice towards people of the LGBTQ community. We have a prejudice to people who just simply don't share the same ideologies or political thoughts that we have. I'm going to tell you that that's not acceptable. That's not who we are. Everybody who's listening, unless you were a Native American, unless you're somebody who was here when the Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria arrived, unless your family can be traced back to part of the original greeting committee, at some point or another, you came from someplace else. I'd like to move to my partner, Keith Gentes. I'd like to talk to Keith and have Keith share his perspective of where we are today and what's going on with the president and the presidential race. Keith, welcome back to the show.
Adam, thank you for having me again. It's always a pleasure to be here. I have no doubt this will be a lively discussion. I'm very much looking forward to it. I want to kind of ride coattails off of something that you just said, and there's one word that's really resonating with me as I begin to have this dialogue with you, and that is perspective. Our ability to function as a society really depends on civil discourse. And I've never, I'm 40 years old, and in no point in time in my life have I ever seen this country in such a stage of we're not even able to discuss differing viewpoints with one another. And that's very troublesome to me. Quite often you find yourself in a conversation with somebody who has a differing viewpoint, and you have to really ask yourself, are you looking for affirmation in this conversation, or are you looking to learn and have an exchange of ideas? And I think too often right now, people are just looking for affirmation in their thoughts. There's no ability to compartmentalize differing viewpoints. Logic, reason have no place in our debate today. And that's just completely backwards and upside down from where we should be. Just to kind of go back to the overall topic of the recent debates we've had, again, it's perspective. Let's be honest, I think at this point, in most people's eyes, the cake's already baked. Wouldn't you agree?
You say, let's be honest. Honesty is a foreign concept to some. I do think that, and I like that saying, that the cake is baked. But what we need to do is really take a step back. I have somebody who's very near and dear to me, Dr. Fred Sawyer, somebody who is a partner, has been a friend, a mentor. I don't want to age him and say a father figure, but he'd be the first one to tell you that he's old enough to be my father. He uses a term, let's peel back the onion. And as we peel back the onion and we look at where our country is and we look at the pandemic, if you think about the messaging that the president has had since the beginning of the pandemic, it has been, there's nothing to worry about. Then he blamed the Chinese, which is completely racist. You can't blame a group of people from a country. It's a virus. You can't blame a country as a whole for the virus. You can say that you don't like how they handled the virus. You can say that you don't like how they informed other people about the virus or quarantined or any of those issues. But I have friends who are Chinese American, and blaming the Chinese to me is offensive. It's again, I think that it's prejudicial, and I think that it is very representative of what a lot of people in this country fail to recognize as racist. The COVID pandemic has been something that is really, as you peel back the onion, maybe the greatest example of the failure of our leadership to inform the public and take care of public health, safety, and welfare. Like I was beginning to say, the president said there's nothing to worry about. Then it's the Chinese. Then it's we're going to do everything we can to stomp this out. Then it's we can't allow this to hurt business. Then it's about we're going to give, stimulus money, which is very needed in different areas, except for the fact that a lot of his friends were the ones that were applying for it at these big corporations until they got shamed and they gave the money back. Then, unfortunately, and I say this with true sympathy and respect for the president and his wife, the first lady, unfortunately, they contract the virus. And I wish them both well, and I wish them and all of the people who have been struck by the virus a speedy recovery. Humanity is an important part of our fabric as a country, and I don't wish our president, our first lady, or anybody else ill. But after he was struck with the virus, then it was, this virus isn't that bad. And this is very recent. So, listeners, he's saying that the virus isn't that bad. How do you think the families of the 200,000 people who perished as a result of this virus feel about the virus? The answer isn't we're going to get a vaccine by the new year like Vice President Pence promised. They're mixing politics and science. You can't do that. Science is up to the doctors. They're politicizing everything they have an opportunity to do. So, Keith, I know that I've probably rambled to your question, but talk about baking the cake. The cake is one big COVID cake.
I mean, I never thought I would see physical barriers separating the candidates in a debate in an essentially empty hall. And there's really no quarter for Vice President Pence to take, being the head of the administration's COVID task force. He tried to slickly pivot off of what Senator Harris brought up as her main point, being that the administration has failed the American people. And he cleverly tried to dodge it and reframe her argument insofar as that the American people had failed. And that's just not simply true. We have certain reliances on the people we elect to be truthful and forthright with us. And it's not even an arguable point because of the receipts that we now have through the revelations of the Bob Woodward book. January 28th, it's not even up for debate that they knew the lethality of this disease, the means by which it could be transmitted, and essentially what personal protection gear would be necessary to combat the overwhelming influx of patients who needed to be treated for this, as we saw through March, April, and amazingly, we're seeing in 39 of the states today. I believe the statistics are that we're having higher rates of hospital admissions for COVID than we were at any point in time during the actual lockdown itself. That's inarguable. And yesterday, shortly before the debate, which is something that I thought would have been made mention, but it wasn't, in an unprecedented move, the New England Journal of Medicine, a nonpartisan, non-biased publication, essentially a world-renowned medical journal, an authority that speaks, when it speaks, physicians, people in the medical field, they listen. They didn't pull any punches. They came out and said, this response has been so unbelievably inept that this administration needs to be voted out. That's not just an opinion of somebody on the street corner who saw some catchy, talking sound bites from Fox News or MSNBC or CNN. That's a body of scientists and doctors who are saying, for our preservation of society, this needs to change. It needs to change immediately.
We're going to go to break. Before we go to break, Krause, you always end the show with a witty quote. and I love your quote, but I want to give you the credit for it. If you find yourself, come on, Krause, help me out here.
If you find yourself to be the smartest person in the room,
you're in the wrong room. We'll be back in a minute.
From the Malamut and Associates Law Studios, this is the Adam Malamut Show.
The radical left. Will you shut up, man? Listen, who is on your list, Joe? Who's on your list?
Right. Gentlemen, I think
this
we've
is
ended
so
this.
He's going to pack the court.
We have ended.
Not going to give a list.
We have ended.
Happy Saturday night. This is Adam Malamut, the Adam Malamut Show. Thank you for tuning in. I'm here with my special guest, Keith Gentes. As always, we're always happy to have Keith here. We have a great dialogue going tonight. And we're talking about the smartest man in the room. And the problem that we have oftentimes in leadership, whether it's in business, in sports, in politics, is somebody who believes that they're the smartest person in the room. And I shouldn't even say man, because it really is the smartest person in the room. You know, leaders surround themselves with people who have better skill sets than they do. I mean, geez, that's why I have Keith sitting here. You know, I'm going to hire a guy, a young attorney who's not so young anymore, because I recognized as a young attorney that, you know, he's got an outstanding skill set that adds to what we already have. And now proudly to be my partner, I'm proud that he's my partner. I've got Keith here talking about what is, I believe, the most critical 24 days in probably the 50 years of my life as it comes to how this country is run and how we are led. So, Keith, let's talk about the Supreme Court.
Gladly.
I know you've got a strong opinion on the process in appointing a new justice to the highest court of this country. Tell the audience what you think.
So, Vice President Pence did a very good job in terms of framing certain topics he wanted to discuss and certain things that he wanted to get across. Not so much answering the questions of the moderators we discussed in an earlier segment, but he pivoted the question to Senator Harris regarding the topic of court packing. And this seems to be a very hot button issue for people. They want to know whether presidential candidate Biden and Senator Harris, where do they stand on this issue? And I think the question that needs to be answered before a commitment is made on what side of the argument they fall on that is, why is this topic even coming up? Well, the reason the topic is coming up is because it's a potential reaction to something that the Republican administration wants to do, which is nominate and appoint and approve Judge Amy Coney Barrett to Justice Amy Coney Barrett. So I don't think you can ask the question of, why won't they answer without bringing up, why are they being asked this question? Something has to happen as a predicate before this hypothetical comes to fruition. So I think there was actually an opportunity for Senator Harris to, volley that back to Vice President Pence and say, look, the only reason this is even being discussed is because you guys are completely flying in the face of precedent that you set in 2016 with Judge Garland. And I think that needs to be framed in that way. Clearly there's discussion on the Democratic side in terms of packing the court and whatnot, and it's a term of, expanding it to get a more balance between the conservative perspective and the liberal perspective. But I really question whether or not in terms of, what are the people voting, what is their knowledge of the history of the court and whatnot? Do they think, 9 is set in stone? Because that's not the history of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, if you look in the Constitution, you cannot tell me where it says a specific number of justices. It doesn't speak to that. It speaks to the fact that there's a court needs to be established, but the framework of our federal judiciary system wasn't set up until the Judiciary Act of 1789. The only mention of any aspect of the Supreme Court is in Article 1, I believe it's Section 3, Clause 6, where it speaks of the necessity of an office of a Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. But throughout our history, the court has fluctuated in terms of desires to expand and contract. You know, initially it was established with 1 Chief Justice and 5 Associate Justices. And then there was an attempt to expand it in 1801, which failed through a corrective measure in 1802. Another thing that needs to be taken into consideration is the fact that these justices back then didn't just sit in Washington, D.C. They rode circuit and dealt with issues all across the country. That's why they call it circuit court, because they rode circuit and they went to different areas of the country. So, you know, going through our country's geographic expansion from the early 1800s to the mid-1800s, we added a justice. We went to 7 justices in 1807. We went to 9 in 1837. And actually, there was an attempt by, President FDR in I believe it was 1937, the ultimate decision in the West Coast Hotel versus Parrish. They refer to that decision as the switch in time that saved 9. And that's when Justice Roberts switched over from the block of 4 conservatives to the 4 liberals, gave the decision to protect Washington State's ability to enforce a minimum wage requirement, and that essentially led the groundwork for the implementation of the New Deal and whatnot. And what they were looking to do in that point was that they were going to give President Roosevelt, the ability to appoint a justice for every sitting justice that was over 70 years old in 6 months. He was going to have the ability to pack the court up to 15. So this idea is not a radical idea in any way, shape, or form during the time of election. Let's see what happens over the next 24 days and whether or not the appointment and confirmation goes through, because, if that happens, the answer may be yes, we are going to pack the court as a complete reaction to what the Republican administration's doing in terms of this nomination.
I find it to be interesting that people on social media are so focused on any one issue, whether it be packing the court or the threat, which is all I believe it is, of raising taxes immediately. The Vice President Biden, I'm getting ready to call him President Biden. I'm superstitious and I don't want to do that. Vice President Biden has sound bites. Sound bites are created over time and become a multiple of one viewpoint. Viewpoints change over time. Vice President Biden, in his more than 45 years of public service, has seen a lot of different things and will admittedly tell you that his viewpoint has changed based on where our country was at the moment to where it is in the future. Viewpoints are nothing but a snapshot in time. And I'll tell you the most crude example I can give you of a change of a viewpoint is, as a kid, you may not like broccoli, and it may be in every one of your dishes today. It's a change in time. It's a change in taste. It's a change in perspective. It's born through experiences that you have. Our country needs a change. Our country needs a cleansing. I mean, really, our country needs a colonic. But our country needs a different perspective. We are not the country that we were in the 80s, in the 70s, in the 60s, in the 90s. We're losing our edge. And I know that the listeners of this station love this country. I've listened to the station. I've listened to the call-ins on different shows. Please don't be blinded by what you've always done. If you've always voted in one particular column, that doesn't mean that you need to always vote in the same column. I will tell you that I was a huge Ronald Reagan fan. Huge Ronald Reagan fan. Unfortunately, I was too young to vote for President Reagan. But I also thought that his successor, his vice president, President George Bush, was an exceptional leader. Because you've always voted one way doesn't mean that that's the only way or the right way. In my office, in Malamut & Associates, we talk about all the time the wrong answer. If this was a word, the wrongest answer is because this is how we've always done it. Our country deserves better. You deserve better. Your children deserve better. We don't need somebody who is going to lead our country, continue to lead our country based on their ego. We need leadership based on our country's needs. Keith, we talk about fact-checking all the time. When we come back, we're going to go to break in a minute. When we come back, I want to get into some of the fact-checking. I want to really emphasize the importance of truthfulness as people ponder really what America's going to look like. We're going to go to break. We'll be back in a minute. This is the Adam Malamut Show. Happy Saturday night.
Real people, real perspectives, real opinion. Now back to Adam Malamut.
One segment to go on the Adam Malamut Show. This is the Adam Malamut Show. Real people, real perspectives, and real opinion. Adam, all yours.
Thanks, Krause. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you for staying with me. This is a show that I, quite frankly, have been excited all day about doing. This is a show that I think that we need more of. Not just my show, not just the Adam Malamut Show, not just my perspective, but we need all of your ideas. We need your thoughts. This government doesn't want to hear your ideas and thoughts. If they did, they would be listening and they'd be hearing that the businesses that are going out of business, that have been generational, multi-generational businesses that are closing, they would understand and appreciate and look to fix the pain that families are feeling as their sole sources of income are being squashed during this terrible pandemic. If this administration was paying attention, they wouldn't have impounded millions of pieces of PPE that states, counties, and municipalities have tried to procure for the benefit of their communities as well as their first responders. This administration played politics with the coronavirus, with COVID-19. This administration decided that it was more important to control the narrative, which has changed multiple times. I mean, you want to talk about a changing narrative. It was safe, now it's not safe. Then it's safe again, it's not safe. Everybody should open, we shouldn't reopen. Who knows what to do? Every single soundbite that this administration created had a different message. Keith, let's talk about where we go from here.
You know, the word of the day for me has been perspective, and it's inarguable that this administration viewed this pandemic, at least initially, through the lens that it was a blue state problem. It was a blue state problem for the blue state governors to deal with. And the means by which, PPE was secured and distributed, and you hear the stories from the frontline workers, thinking back to March and April, you're hearing that they're going into the emergency rooms, they're going into the hospitals, they're going in wearing trash bags, they're recycling masks that should be discarded after one use. This is 2020 we're talking about. We're the guiding light in the rest of the world. We're the most advanced civilization this world has ever seen. And we failed our people by not giving them the basic necessities to protect them, who are only trying to protect us. Where do we go from here? I didn't hear anything in terms of a plan offered either in the last night's debate, or any time for that matter, because I just believe there's an insistence and reliance on the fact that this administration is incapable of admitting fault or mistake. Everything they did in their eyes has been perfect. Again, you had a debate last night between vice presidential candidates that was separated by plastic plexiglass barriers because the head of the National COVID Task Force could potentially be contagious because we don't even know when the test results were. We're talking about now, whether you think Vice President Pence won last night, whether you think Senator Harris won last night, it's pretty much a moot point because the page has already been turned because the Presidential Debate Commission came out and said that the next presidential debate was going to be a virtual forum. President Trump has already come out and said he's not going to waste his time with that. And in turn, Vice President Biden has said, okay, well, I'll go find something else to do on October 15th. And now the campaign manager from the Trump administration, Bill Sipien, is saying, no, let's just push it back to October 22nd. We're talking about restructuring the schedule of presidential debates because the leader of the free world has COVID. Think about that. We're sitting here trying to protect ourselves and our families, relying on this information, relying on the promulgations of the administrations, departments, the CDC, things of that nature. They can't even protect themselves.
We're talking about honesty and dishonesty and what they can protect and how they can protect us, let alone themselves. Vice President Pence said, the president has a health care plan to protect pre-existing conditions. This to me was a glaring point that he was trying to make. If you Google this, if you look this up, you will find that this is false. It is false, folks. The president does not have a health care plan to protect pre-existing conditions. The Trump administration, and this is written by Tammy Luby, giving credit where credit is due, the Trump administration, along with Republicans in Congress, have long promised a plan to replace the Affordable Care Act. 4 years they've promised a plan. In fact, before more than 4 years, when the president started running his first campaign, and that they would also protect people with pre-existing conditions. The president has yet to put forth a concrete plan that will provide the same strong provisions that currently exist under the Affordable Care Act. Mail-in voting. Right now, I will tell you, it is more important than ever that you have confidence in the process of mail-in voting. Vice President says mail-in voting creates a massive opportunity for voter fraud. Don't buy this. This is political jargon. This is voter suppression. This is the vice president trying to get you to not exercise your vote because you're worried that it won't count. The claim about voter fraud is false. It is flatly false. Numerous studies have found mail-in voting does not lead to a massive fraud. Again, fact-checking, Paul Murphy and Marshall Cohen did the work on this. Vice President Pence said that Robert Mueller, special counsel Robert Mueller, found no obstruction, no collusion. No obstruction, no collusion. Case closed. That's incorrect. That is false. We're getting lied to over and over again. Robert Mueller declined to make a judgment on obstruction of justice due to Justice Department regulations against indicting a sitting president. In other words, if this was you or me, the Justice Department's probably indicting. Vote with your decision. Look at how the country is being led and vote with your decision. Keith, before we wrap things up, is there anything that you feel the audience, the listeners, need to hear about the conduct of the president and the vice president during this election?
I think the fact of the matter is, if you look with your eyes open, you see what's going on, believe what your eyes and ears tell you, don't believe what the party's telling you. A little Orwell, 1984. But unfortunately, it's staggering that's where we are.
So that last piece about the no obstruction, that was Jeremy Herb. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for tuning in. I want to thank you for listening to the Adam Malamut Show. I know today went a little bit of a different direction than you're used to. But again, for Adam Malamut, myself, Keith Gentes, Krause, I want to thank everybody. Have a nice week.
Thanks for listening to the Adam Malamut Show, a Jacob Media production. If you're interested in learning more about the power of the radio hour, contact Joe Krause at 267-261-3428. This program is a paid commercial announcement and in no way represents the views of WPHT or its management.